You are listening to the Information Security Notes and Podcast, episode 34, original release on November 19th, 2020. As always, I'm your host, Josh Amishav. Today we have John Strand on the show. John is the owner of Black Hills Information Security, specializing in pentesting, active defense, and hunt teaming services, as well as the CEO of Active Countermeasures, which is focused on tracking advanced attackers inside your network. Though he may be best known for the tremendous amount of awesome content he creates for the security community. Seriously, if you haven't watched any of his videos, stop listening to this and go watch. My three main takeaways from our conversation were 1. Why 0 days don't matter. Hint, it's all about the creds. 2. How to bypass two-factor authentication. And 3. The one guiding rule for creating a successful security business. You'll enjoy those 3 things plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense. If you need visibility into data breaches affecting your employees, your users, or third-party suppliers before the credentials are used to hack into your network, head on over to breachsense.io/contact to start your free 7-day trial and learn how to prevent account takeover attacks and stop online fraud. And now, here's my conversation with John. So in the age of COVID and everyone working from home, how are pen tests different today?
So we had this massive shift in the way that pen testing was done. And this shift was happening naturally, right? So a tremendous number of organizations have been moving to like a zero trust model where you're kind of getting rid of this Active Directory, Castle, firewall, DMZ type infrastructure and moving towards more of a cloud type infrastructure. And that was a gradual transition that everybody expected to happen over time. But as soon as COVID hit, it was like a wall. All of a sudden, cloud technologies were very quickly adopted. Organizations drastically accelerated VPN technologies, working remote, bring your own device. All of that stuff just basically hit like a tsunami because organizations had to choose between going out of business and continuing with their existing IT infrastructures. So now whenever you're pen testing, you're really focusing on the credentials, you're focusing on getting access to cloud resources, because even if you get access via spearfishing to someone's computer, it can be a little bit difficult to try to make sure that you're on the right network range, you're not attacking their home network, the VPN is set up properly so you can come back into it. So you're really kind of getting into the situation where target verification is even more important for pen testing than it was. And from a security perspective, you don't have all of these people in one building under one umbrella. They're now scattered all over to the 4 corners of the world. So we've got really cool challenges for the pen testing community and really cool challenges for the defensive community to start dealing with this. But like I said, this is really something that was happening anyway. In many organizations, they basically just accelerated or increased their licensing for their VPNs. They basically just kind of rolled with the programs they already had in place. But there were a large number of companies that were definitely caught flat-footed.
Cool. So what areas are we not focused on that we should be when pen testing?
So there's 2 separate things, but they both come back to creds. Whenever you're looking at breaking into the cloud, you're not going to be searching for a 0 day. Even though I'm absolutely certain you're going to have listeners that are like, well, I'm totally looking for 0 days. And that's fine. There's a certain subset of the community that will be doing that, right? And those people are relatively rare, precious unicorns. But for the majority of the attacks, you're going to be going after credentialed access. You're going to be trying to take advantage of basically privileges that are overprescribed to the different users. So you're going to be looking for that. And that means you're going to be doing password spray attacks. And you're going to be trying to bypass two-factor authentication with tools like Evil Engine X, Modellishka, Cred King, Cred Sniper, even Mail Sniper. You're going to be taking advantage of these different attack methodologies to gain access to someone's account. And this opens up a whole bunch of challenges again for the defender. One of the big challenges that defenders are going to run into is the traditional mindset of we're getting our logs off of our systems real time, we're detecting attacks, and we can harden these things, is kind of going out the window. With a lot of cloud vendors, the logs aren't nearly as good as they should be, number one. Number two, sometimes there's a delay in the logs getting into your SIM, even if you're logging in. And then finally, many of the vendors are setting up their tiered pricing, and I'm looking at Microsoft for this. To actually get the logs you need, you have to pay for a higher tier, which I think is garbage. We shouldn't have to pay for the security that we need in an organization. We should be paying for features and things of that nature, not peace of mind.
Very true. So you mentioned spearfishing. What was the attack vector you discovered last year in Google Calendar?
So a couple of different things. This was actually developed by Mike Felch and Bo Bolick, You Stay Ready, and Daft Hack. Bo is still at BHIS, and you stay ready moved on to CrowdStrike. And what happened with this particular attack is they discovered that if you send an email into somebody, it's going to go through all kind of spearfishing detection before it actually hits their inbox. Whenever you send a calendar invite, there's a couple of things that occur that are kind of weird. Through the APIs that Google have, you can actually add a calendar like entry into someone's calendar, which in and of itself isn't necessarily the vulnerability. But what you can then do is you can basically say that certain people have already agreed to attend. And you can kind of pull the strings a little bit, and make it look like executives have already accepted this particular meeting and things of that nature. But where it gets super interesting is if I'm sending in a calendar attack to an organization, I can spearfish one user, and they get a pop up and it says, "Hey, you've got this meeting coming up in 10 minutes. Please review the files at this link." And you can put your spearfishing attack there, where you can actually pull up via Cred Sniper, and you can basically gain access to their account, bypass not bypass, but you can harvest their two-factor authentication token and gain access. That in and of itself is kind of bad, but it's not like catastrophic. BHIS is totally not going to go to the presses with this particular attack bad. What made it we're not going to the presses level bad was I can send an email to you. I can send an email to a coworker. I cannot send an email to everyone at your organization. So I can't carpet bomb an organization. But what I can do is I can send an email to you, or at least I could do. I could send an email to you, make you the organizer of the meeting, and then also have everyone in your organization on that meeting invite as well. It won't go to everyone because I'm sending it from the outside of the organization. But if you're the organizer and you say, "I decline this meeting," or interact or change this meeting, it automatically sends an update to everyone in the organization. And now your spearfishing attack is across the entire organization. So where this really gets catastrophic is with the meeting invite. We can also send an email with a meeting invite, or at least we could, and it would basically create meetings that would start like every 30 seconds in your calendar and carpet bomb the entire calendar, to the point where your phone would be saying constantly that you have a meeting that's starting, to the point where you would actually disable people's phones. Their phones would just stop working. And it wasn't a matter of just rebooting the phone, because Google Calendar was core, and it would automatically start up and start doing that again. So it was basically a DOS condition that could be ran against any organization that was using Google Apps as their domain provider and their email provider. So yeah, this was nasty stuff, and we worked with Google and the Google team. We were told actually fixed it, and that's great. Good on them. They were really, really good to work with in this example.
So some of the tools you mentioned Cred Sniper, Cred King, and Mail Sniper. Cred Sniper is essentially is a phishing framework. So traditionally, back in the day, we would just go to the target's website and open up the browser, just copy the page into the HTML, change the action, the HTML form action, to send it to our site, and then send the phishing attack that way. What does Cred Sniper add to that?
So what Cred Sniper adds to that is a couple of additional things. One, what it does is it logs into your account, automatically creates an app password, so you have persistent access going into an organization. It also had the ability to automatically put in a filter security. You get these emails from Google saying, "Hey, another person is logged in on this device." It basically filters out those email messages so the user doesn't get a notification that somebody has tried to log in to their email. And the final thing that's really, really cool about it, and I think Google has fixed this, is it has a U2FA bypass. So as that interception proxy between the victim and Google, it goes to Google and says, "Yo, I'm an iPad." And if you had U2FA enabled, Google's like, "Well, you can't support U2FA. You're not going to be able to plug a YubiKey into an iPad. So we're just going to ignore that for now and basically let you log in." So those are some of the additional things that Cred Sniper actually brought to the table. And I think a lot of that stuff's being added into other frameworks that are more maintained these days as well.
Is that specific to just phishing Google accounts, or can you do that for create a module for other websites?
So this particular one, it would be easy to create a module for other websites, but as a proof of concept, it was just basically for Google.
Okay. So for anyone who's tried brute forcing any notable cloud provider, you tend to get blacklisted pretty quickly. How does Cred King solve this problem?
Well, okay, so Cred King was probably the first one. The next one was Fireprox. Both of these are by Mike. And
Okay.
basically, what it does is you can basically use Amazon's API gateway, and you can set it up as a proxy where you're going to be basically setting a proxy for your password spray coming from like your Amazon instance and spraying Google or spraying Office 365. What this buys you is your IP address rotates around whenever you're using Amazon's API gateway. And then the other thing that it buys you that is incredibly powerful is we have discovered that a lot of these providers won't deny list each other. So if you're looking at doing a password spray from Amazon going against like Microsoft, they clearly have some rules in place that basically say, hey, don't block Amazon's API gateway. And the reason for that is if they did, they're legitimate customers that are setting up, APIs and communication between different applications. They could basically lock down legitimate traffic of other customers. And this gets into one of the problems with the cloud is if the cloud is wide open and you can set up Lambda, you can set up Golang stuff in GCP, you can set up things in Azure, and it's also being used for like, application to application, API to API communication. We have a problem because it means that these platforms can be used to attack, but you can't deny list because it's also being used for legitimate business purposes, not just for the customer that's being tested, but for everybody. So what you see is these organizations just taking entire ASNs and saying anything from this ASN is not going to get deny listed. And that's basically what we started taking advantage of in our tests. And that's huge, right? But this is kind of that brave new world of cloud computing that we've all got to get used to right now.
What techniques can you use against identity providers like Okta?
Okay, so what you do with a number of these different providers. So it isn't exactly an inherent vulnerability on this, like at all. But whenever you're looking at, once again, multi-tenant services for two-factor authentication, if you have a customer, let's say that they're using something like Okta, one of the things you should look into, and I think I'm hoping this is fixed. Well, I don't know. But what you can do is if a customer is using like a two-factor authentication product, you can stand up like an eval license for that exact same product. And within a lot of these different portals, you can send emails to your employees saying, I'm enrolling you in Okta, I'm enrolling you in other two-factor organizations, I'm enrolling you as a customer that you're going to use this product. But what happens is they give you the capability to customize your HTML, and they also give you the capability to put in any arbitrary emails that you want to enroll your customers. So with these two things, this becomes an outstanding spearfishing platform where you can basically set it up where you can now spearfish from that platform to the customers that are using that product and provide a link by modifying the arbitrary HTML. So you're now creating this spearfish that comes from a provider like Okta. And I'm just using them as an example. I don't need them calling me up and like chewing my ass because I picked on them. But a lot of these different vendors, you can use them as that platform to send your spearfishing attack, modify the URL, and then have them come someplace where you can intercept these creds, you can intercept their two-factor authentication, and it looks totally legitimate because it's coming from that cloud provider, two-factor provider like Okta as an example.
Okay, so you mentioned spear phishing. Many times companies aren't interested in conducting a controlled phishing exercise because the assumption is that it'll be successful. How can we help organizations combat spear phishing attacks? Is it education, or should we focus on technical controls, or both? It seems like either way there are some serious limitations.
So whenever you're looking at limitations of things, like it really, really bothers me. And you didn't say this, but I know that other people in the industry have said this. They say, well, spearfishing fails about 20%, or excuse me, spearfishing succeeds at about 25% of the time, 20% of the time. If you're doing a well-crafted ruse, it goes higher. So it must be worthless to do user awareness training because we're doing it and it's not working. That entire argument is complete and utter trash. And you feel free to just like not hang out with people that have that type of attitude about anything in security. The reason why that is an absolute complete garbage take for a lot of people in the industry is because everything has a failure percentage. You look at patching, it has, a failure percentage of about 10% in some organizations, depending on the patch. You look at vulnerability assessments, we're missing tons of vulnerabilities. I would say, you're probably looking at missing about 10% of the vulnerabilities or more in organizations. You look at your endpoint security product, any moderately competent pen testing company can bypass those products giving enough time. So they have a failure percentage. Network intrusion detection has a failure percentage. Hell, you go and you look at the Verizon data breach report or Mandiant reports, and you look at how organizations detected they were compromised. You're looking at SIM is something like 1.5% of the time it detects the actual attack. You look at your AV and endpoint, it's like 4.3 or something ridiculous like that at the time it's detecting the attack for these breaches. So if we basically treated every security technology that has a failure percentage as garbage and we stopped doing it, well, then we wouldn't have anything at all. We wouldn't be patching. We would have no AV. We wouldn't have anything. It's just when you're looking at that spearfishing and you're looking at users, the fundamental difference is human beings have agency. And what I mean by that is it's easier for us to look at somebody clicking a link and have a direct correlation as somebody to blame, a thing that can be blamed. It's really hard to look at patching and say, well, we're gonna blame Microsoft for releasing patches because they didn't get their code right. It's absurd. So when we're looking at this, we can't look at these things as failure points and we shouldn't bother to do them. You should look at it as everything has failure points and you're going to tie all of this together. So you're going to have that user awareness training and you're going to try real hard to make it not suck. And I'll talk about how you can make it not suck here in just a little bit. But you're also going to couple that with a number of different spearfishing detections like Office 365 provides. Where you can do geofencing possibly. There's a bunch of different protections you can put in place. Sandboxing is another one of any attachments that actually come in. There's a number of things that we can do, and user awareness training is just one of those things that is fundamentally flawed, like all of them. And you overlay all of these things together, and you hope that if one thing fails, something else is going to be able to pick that up. Now, for the user awareness training, most organizations send people a PowerPoint deck that has cute cartoon characters, and then they basically sign a document saying that they've read that they shouldn't click on links from strangers. That's trash. Don't do it that way. Instead, anytime you do a spearfishing campaign, you can share the failure percentages, but what you're looking for is a narrative. You're looking for a story. You're looking for a hero. And what I mean by that is you're going to spearfish and you're going to have one or two people that were rock stars. They were like, yeah, we totally saw this email coming in. I hovered over the link. I saw the domain was sketchy. And then I turned it over to the security team. You're going to create the narrative of the hero because heroes are things that people emulate. So they can be like, hey, I just saw that Bill did all of these different things. Let's be more like Bill because that's human nature. They want to emulate positive. Now, you can absolutely try to punish people for clicking on links. Once again, it's garbage to do that. But basically, if you approach it that way, anybody at any point, absolutely without question, I can get them to click a link on an email. With enough social engineering and recon on that individual, I absolutely can get you to click a link on an email. What you do want to watch out for, however, are those people that are chronic failures, where they're always clicking on links, they're always failing. Then you want to start talking about remedial training or other activities there. But whenever you're looking at the overall 20%, a lot of organizations, that 20% actually rotates and different people fall for different ruses. So you want to equip them with the training to identify those ruses, but don't make it antiseptic. An example, my son's taking history online. And I love history. It's absolutely the coolest thing, right? And the history that my son is learning is like, here's the date, here's the person, here's the war, here's the bill, here's the thing they did. And the actual impact of those things is completely lost because the narrative, the connective tissue is gone. So when you're training people for spearfishing attacks, find heroes, find narratives, create that connective tissue, and you're going to do a lot better.
All right, social engineering is traditionally used to distribute various types of malware, like ransomware. And in the news recently, I think in June, there was a couple of headlines about ransomware gangs teaming up. What is the effects of that on the general landscape?
All right, so this is one of those things where we start defining a threat when we do it too quickly. When you look at ransomware, if you say, okay, what are the types of ransomware? How do I defend against those? A lot of the websites out there, they defined it as two predominant categories. They see it's either full hard drive encryption ransomware or it's file encrypting ransomware. And they kind of left it at that. The problem with us defining it that quickly is it really ignored the third type of ransomware, the third wave that we're actually seeing today. And that third wave is ran by human beings. It's like red teams pulling out full operations against organizations. So that whole automated aspect of it absolutely exists. But a lot of the dangers that we're starting to see with ransomware today is, like you said, these groups are now partnering up, they're working together, they're hunting in packs. But more importantly, all of those things come back to real human being behind the keyboard. So the reason why this matters, all right, and this gets into my rant against threat intel feeds and the way most people handle threat intelligence. Whenever we think about risk, we really try to quantify it and put it in nice, neat little boxes so we can avoid that threat actor and reduce our risk. So whenever we're looking at APT groups, we go to MITRE and we say APT1 does these techniques. If we're looking at APT28, these are the techniques that they're going to use. And we get in our head, in our lizard brain, and we get the idea that that's the only techniques that these particular adversaries are going to use, which is garbage. And that same thing's happening with ransomware. You have a lot of security orchestration and automation platforms that are basically programmed to deal with your general run-of-the-mill automated ransomware. And that's fine. There's value in that. But whenever you're looking at a real human being, you don't have attackers in Russia, in China, and on red teams and pen testing firms like Black Hills Information Security call up their managers and say, oh my God, they completely broke our cyber kill chain. We're not going to be able to break in because we don't have any more techniques. So when you're thinking about organizations and how they identify these different threat actors, you can use the blind philosophers describing an elephant. You have a whole bunch of blind philosophers that are describing an elephant by touch, and they describe it specifically by what they can feel at that point. One describes a tusk, one describes a trunk, one describes the tail, one describes a foot, and all of them are convinced that they're describing this elephant, this APT group, but what they're actually seeing is just one part of that APT group. And the other thing that is lost on many people, and this applies to the ransomware thing where you have these gangs basically working together, is an attack group is inherently fluid. If they get stopped, they will change their tactics and they will use different techniques and they will use different tools. So it is not enough to try to do threat emulation for just a threat actor like one APT group. It becomes absolutely imperative that we can do threat emulation and simulation at scale across multiple different techniques to find our gaps in our organization. So with ransomware, you're now dealing with threat actors that are real human beings who are adapting their tactics on the fly and developing new tactics. That's a fundamentally different type of threat actor than just automated malware.
Okay, and from a defensive standpoint, when you have, let's say, ransomware on your network and you're prompted to pay, what kind of, how do you come to the decision whether to pay or not to pay?
Oh, dude, that's such a personal. That's such a personal decision. Um, you have people all the time that say you shouldn't ever pay because that's negotiating with terrorists and you're just perpetuating it. Um, it, and that's hard because it's easy for you and me to say, yeah, no one should pay because it's just going to embolden the attackers. That's super simple to say in an
In
interview.
your Garmin, though, it's a little
Yeah,
bit different.
but if it's BHIS and I have like 60, full-time employees, when you add in interns and subcontractors that we're feeding, it's like 100 people now. You are looking at a completely different calculation. If somebody comes to me and says they want $125,000 of Bitcoin to keep your business going, you're damn right I'm going to pay. So there's a difference between that philosophical thing and then the actual visceral action and the activity of actually dealing with it. And I think anytime you're looking at paying or not paying, you've got to look at the cost benefit analysis. What is the total impact to your business? If you're down and they're asking for $100,000 and you're losing that like every day, pay. If you're looking to hire a firm, this is another calculation that many organizations don't do. If you're looking to hire a firm to come in, many times those firms will just negotiate a lower rate for payment. And then you have to pay the firm and the ransomware as well. That still may be more money. So I don't want to ever judge people. I don't want to get on here and say, hey, you should never pay. You should always pay. But I'm going to tell everyone, be ready to pay. Go in and start purchasing some cryptocurrency. Get familiar with how to purchase cryptocurrency and how to do that, because trying to do it like on the fly in like, an hour or so, you're not going to do that. It's going to be really hard to buy cryptocurrency on the fly. It is difficult to get set up. But if you've done it, it's a lot easier. So start that process so you're at least prepared for the eventuality that if you do get this, you're ready to actually buy and then actually move into it.
Would you recommend negotiating directly or going through a company that's what they do?
I would recommend I'd recommend having a broker and working with an organization that has had experience doing negotiations. It's kind of weird. Like if you try to buy a used car directly, a lot of times the used car dealers start playing hardball. But if you bring your uncle, who's a car guy, then all of a sudden the negotiations are fundamentally different. I'll give you an example. My dad and we bought a skid steer up in North Dakota, a track loader. And when we got there, they wanted $20,000, and I was willing to pay that. That wasn't that big of a deal for a used skid steer. It was exactly what I needed. And my dad was handling the negotiations, and he's been a car dealer his whole life. And he shows up and he's like, "We'll pay 17,000." And I'm like, "Oh my God!" In my head, that's like ridiculously low. The guy countered back and said, "Well, how about 19,500?" And finally, they decided to flip a stupid coin over what I was going to pay for the skid steer. And my dad won the coin flip, and he got it for $17,000. So he saved me money doing that. So that was worth having him right up there with me, of course. So what it boils down to is if you're working with a firm that has experience negotiating with these companies, they know how to say the right things. They know how to push the right way. And more importantly, there's a certain level of pushback that's expected from them rather than somebody that's actually currently have their entire network down.
Cool. All right, let's pivot a bit. Can you tell me how'd you get started in InfoSec, and how did you end up starting Black Hills Information Security?
So that's kind of a long story. So what happened was I actually started at Anderson Consulting and then moved into Accenture whenever they did their name change. And I was working at the Department of Interior on the world's largest class action lawsuit, Cobell versus the Department of Interior. You can see this out on GrowClaw. There's all the court documents that exist out there. And there was an attack against a number of our systems that was actually perpetuated by a pen testing firm. And one of my best friends today was actually behind that. I didn't know that person, didn't meet that person for like 5 years after that. But he was actually running the pen testing team at that time. And I was able to actually go through the logs, identify the attack. It was the RPC stat D vulnerability, which is a format string vulnerability to overwrite a return pointer on an RPC service on a Linux computer. And I was able to detect that. And I was actually working help desk at the time. And literally, I knew hardly anything at all about security. I just knew where varlog messages were because my manager, I was going in the evenings and I was keeping these scripts alive that would run, that would do batch processing for PLSQL reporting. And my job was like, stay here, watch this log, tail minus F, and then the log. And if it looks like it errors out, go to another terminal and restart it. I mean, that's literally what I was doing. And I found out how to do that with the simple Bourne script.
Bash script.
Yeah, just okay. I was able to do that. But I knew where varlog messages was. So whenever these systems were being attacked, one of the systems administrators, I basically was like, let's cat out varlog messages. And there it was, like clear as daylight, man. It was absolutely perfect for a format string attack. And you could see what the service was. You could see that they were restarting that service. And then it kind of became this conversation of, I'm skipping so many steps on this. It became a conversation of, is this something that I could do? And I was like, sure, how hard can security be? And that's kind of how I got into it, working with Edmundo and then Steve, a bunch of people in the security team at Accenture. And I knew Jack. So I had all these amazing people around me, like Mark Brunig, Pete Tokheim. If they're listening to this, look me up, say hi. But they taught me like almost everything I know about Active Directory. I mean, they sat there and were patient with me and explained everything. And then Bob Angus taught me everything I know about networking at that time. And it was a great environment because of the lawsuit, all of Department of Interior was shut down to internet access and all work had stopped. So we were able to like learn security, and I was able to learn Active Directory and break things, and no one cared like at all. They would just be like, "Oh, John crashed the domain controller today. John, you got to rebuild that thing." And I spent like 3 days rebuilding it with no stress, like at all. So imagine getting a lab back in like 2001 where it was thousands of users. You had multiple different domains and different forests and different transitive trust relationships. And I could break anything I wanted as long as I was willing to rebuild it. I had incredibly patient people with infinite amount of time to sit with me and show me how to do it. No, I was incredibly lucky at the early stages. And then through that whole entire thing, I got a bunch of like certificates. I got CISSP, GCIH, GCFW, and then I got picked up by Northrop Grumman. And then I went into classified world for a long time, and then came out and was teaching for SANS, and then started Black Hills Information Security because I had this amazing Rolodex of SANS students that were calling me up all the time. They're like, "Yo, I need a pen test." And you could always look at teaching for SANS as like a 6-day job interview. So getting work was never hard, and it still isn't. I mean, a lot of the people, like, we don't have an outbound sales team that's like dialing for dollars. We just simply wait by the phone and people call us, and then we go out and we do pen testing. So that's the really abbreviated version of how I got started.
That's amazing. So, from a business standpoint, what kind of challenges are there for people who want to go out on their own and start a security company? What kind of challenges do you have starting a company? And do you have any advice for somebody who wants to follow that path?
So the first thing, and I've helped a number of like sister firms, OpenSec and Red Siege and 40 North. I know I'm forgetting a couple more, but one of the things I'm always doing is trying to help people get their security firms off the ground. And if you talk to anybody, like if you talk to Chris from 40 North, you talk to Tim from Red Siege, my first piece of advice to anybody, Mick Douglas, right? My first piece of advice is always don't do that. Just don't. If you're like, "Oh, I can just stand up a shingle and I can start up a website and bam, I'm going to start getting pen test work." No, you're not. It's hard. It's really, really hard to start a company and do it successfully. I was incredibly lucky in working with the SANS Institute that I had base income so I could build this stuff up over time. But honestly, what I recommend is I say don't. And if you're still interested, you're like, "No, no, 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 I want to face the peril." Then we can have a conversation, right? We can talk about how you should actually do computer security. And at Black Hills Information Security, the one guiding rule that we kind of have, and Jason Blanchard, our content community director, drives this home, is do good for the community and the community will do good for you. So all these movies, all these books by all these people that are talking about greed is good and this is how you run a business, this is how it works on Wall Street, ignore those people. They're wrong. There's a reason why a tremendous number of businesses fail. They fail because they get their head so far up their ass about trying to make a profit, and they can't think of ever giving anything back to the community because of lost opportunity costs. They learn the wrong lessons, and those books are wrong. If you look at the companies that are successful, if you look at like Trusted Sec, BHIS, Red Siege, it's again 40 North, Rendition, and you look at these different companies. Secure Ideas is a great example of this, and OpenSec. You're seeing companies that are successful because they're constantly giving back to the community in the form of valuable webcasts, valuable tools, and valuable research. And if you can give back to the community, I guarantee you that community is going to recognize you and they're going to give back to you. But if you look at this whole entire thing as a game of how do I maximize profits, how do I basically sell to a VC firm, your life is going to suck. I can guarantee you that. It is. It's not going to be real good. So you're constantly going to have this stress, but give back to the community as much as you can. And an example of this, right? An example of this is I do free training for intro to security and intro to SOC analysts. I don't charge a dime for it. It's pay what you can. So when you go to the website, right? If you go to Wild West Hack and Fest and look at our training schedule, you'll see it coming up. If you go to our website, you're going to see this class. And if you click the registration link, it says, here's the discount code. No discount code is like $495. And if you go all the way down, there's like a 90% off, 80% off, 70% off, 50% off, all the way down to zero. Like you can pay nothing for this class. So I literally give a class to the community. That's for all intents and purposes free. If you go to those kind of Wall Street VC funding firms, they look at what I'm doing and they would be like, well, that's asinine. That's stupid. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. But we have a shirt at BHIS, proudly sucking at capitalism. It doesn't mean that I don't like capitalism. It just means the way that a lot of people define it for us, we don't play that way. In this class, doing these free classes, I will make more as an instructor, giving away training for free to people than I made as a SANS instructor, as a senior SANS instructor for teaching fees for SANS. So trust me, you get out there, you start releasing tools, you start doing webcasts, you go to as many meetings talking about computer security for small businesses, you get out there and you present. My first webcast, I started with like 10, 15, 20, 50 people. And I remember coming back and telling my wife, I had 75 people on a webcast today. And it was like steak night, right? Now we're getting about, on some of our webcasts, we're getting over 2,000 people that show up. So you give back to the community and you have that strong perspective of giving all that you possibly can. And I guarantee you the community and the industry will give you more back than you can handle.
That is amazing advice. Thank you. Where can people find you on the web?
I'm Strand JS on Twitter. Our website is blackhillsinfosec.com. We have tons of webcasts. Wild West Hackenfest is our con. And our training kind of runs out of Wild West Hackenfest, even though it's a separate company called Anti-Siphon. But yeah, hunt us down. We're out there and we're constantly doing free stuff. We got Discord channels broken up into all types of different categories. If you're looking for a cool community to come hang out where you got a lot of cool people to share information with, hunt us down.
Thank you. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You bet.
Well, that's it for today. If you have any feedback or questions, tweet at me at Jamoose. And if you got value from this episode, then please share with a friend. See y'all next week.